Isaac Clarkson found Noya pinned beneath a drowned horse in the red, freezing floodwaters of Medicine Creek. Though the flood choked her lungs, she wasn't pleading for her life. Her eyes held a secret that would set Oklahoma ablaze, burning it to the ground. "Please don't stop! Keep going!" she gasped as the killers appeared and closed in. That's when Isaac did the impossible.
Hello, I wish you a wonderful, amazing 2026. If you enjoy old Western stories, then you're in the right place. Tell me where you're watching from, comment and share these videos with friends and families. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel too. My team and I have something wonderful and free for you once we hit the 1,000 subscriber mark. We will share it in the community. You know, we go to great lengths to craft these stories, so your support means a lot to us. Join us and be a part of what we are building.
Before we dive into Isaac's journey, we have to understand the powder keg that was Oklahoma in the 1880s. Most people think the West was just open space, but this land was a complex patchwork of tribal territories. By 1889, the pressure from boomers, white settlers led by men like David Payne, to open up the unassigned lands reached a fever pitch. This led to massive land grab conspiracies, where speculators would use any means necessary, including forged deeds and intimidation, to displace tribes like the Cherokee and Pawnee before the official land runs even began. In our story today, Noya is carrying affidavits. In the Old West, these were more than just paper. They were the only legal shield indigenous people had against wealthy land syndicates. When a drifter like Isaac chooses to protect those papers, he's not just saving a person, he's standing against a tide of historical corruption that redefined the American map.
Isaac Clarkson was a drifter who had spent years running from his own shadow across the Oklahoma Territory. He lived by a cold, lonely code: never get involved and never look back. But when the skies opened over the Wichita Mountains, he stumbled upon a sight that froze his blood. Noya, a Cherokee woman, lay trapped in the red mud with the weight of a stallion crushing her chest. As the flood rose and the silhouettes of ruthless gunmen appeared on the ridge, she didn't beg for mercy, she demanded he keep going. In that moment, Isaac made a choice that would ignite a war.
The sky over the Wichita Mountains didn't just turn gray, it turned a bruised, ugly purple that looked like a fresh wound. Isaac Clarkson watched the clouds from the saddle of his weary roan, his hat pulled low against the rising wind. He was a man who moved like a shadow across the Oklahoma Territory, a ghost in a duster coat who had spent 10 years perfecting the art of being nobody. He lived by a singular, cold rule: never get involved and never look back. Out here, the red dirt swallowed the footprints of the righteous and the wicked alike, and Isaac preferred to keep his own tracks shallow. Then the thunder cracked, not like a roll, but like a gunshot. Within minutes, the dry bed of Medicine Creek wasn't dry anymore. It was a churning, angry artery of red mud and debris, roaring with a hunger that only a flash flood possesses. Isaac spurred his horse toward higher ground, but a sound caught him, a sharp, desperate whinny followed by a human rasp that cut through the gale. He found her where the canyon walls squeezed tight. A massive bay stallion lay dead in the rising torrent, its carcass pinning a woman against a jagged granite shelf. The water was already at her waist, thick with silt and freezing cold. Her long, dark hair was plastered to her face, and her skin was the color of wet ash. This was Noya. She didn't scream when she saw him. She didn't wave her arms in a panic. She simply looked at him with eyes that were dark, deep, and terrifyingly calm. Isaac stopped. He saw the way the rope was tangled, the way the horse's weight was crushing her ribs. He also saw the ridge. 3 silhouettes sat on horseback against the lightning-streaked sky. They didn't move, they didn't offer help. They were shadows in long coats, led by a man Isaac recognized even from a distance, Jedediah Boone. They weren't waiting for the storm to pass. They were waiting for the creek to finish what they had started. "Please," Noya wheezed, her voice a ragged scrape of sound as a wave of red water slapped against her chin. Isaac looked at the riders, then back at the drowning woman. The water rose another inch. The lonely choice stood before him, heavy as lead. If he rode away now, he remained a ghost. If he stayed, he became a target. "Don't stop," she choked out, her hand clawing at a leather satchel tucked against her chest. "Keep going." Isaac Clarkson reached for the cinch of his saddle, his boots sinking into the rising mud. The drifter was about to do the one thing he promised he never would. He was going to look back.
Isaac Clarkson didn't wait for the logic of self-preservation to catch up with his heartbeat. He slid down the slick red embankment, his boots losing purchase on the mud until he plunged waist-deep into the freezing torrent of Medicine Creek. The water was a chaotic force, thick with the grit of the Wichita Mountains, pulling at him like 1,000 desperate hands. Above him on the ridge, a muzzle flash winked through the purple gloom. The crack of the rifle was swallowed by the thunder, but the hiss of the lead as it punched into the water inches from his hip was unmistakable. "Stay down!" he roared, though Noya had nowhere to go. He reached the drowned stallion. The smell was a sickening mix of wet fur, iron-scented blood, and the sulfur of the storm. Isaac jammed his shoulder under the horse's cold, stiffening flank. He was a man of lean muscle, but here, against the weight of a 1,000-pound animal and the relentless pressure of a flash flood, he felt fragile as a dry twig. He found a sturdy length of driftwood wedged against the granite shelf and shoved it deep under the horse's ribs, using the stone as a fulcrum. On the ridge, Jedediah Boone's men fired again. A bullet splintered the very wood Isaac was using as a lever, sending shards of oak into his cheek. He didn't flinch. He put every ounce of his shadowed past, every bit of the shame he had been running from, into one singular, agonizing heave. "Now!" he gasped. With a sickening groan of shifting weight and mud, the horse's carcass moved just enough. Noya didn't wait. With a strength born of pure, cold defiance, she dragged her crushed legs from beneath the beast, her fingernails clawing into the red earth of the bank. Isaac dropped the lever and lunged for her, catching her by the collar of her sodden tunic, just as a fresh surge of water threatened to sweep them both toward the canyon's jagged mouth. He hauled her upward, his lungs burning, his muscles screaming in the cold. He moved like a man possessed, ignoring the rhythmic thud-thud of rifle fire from above. When they finally reached the relative safety of a high sandbar shielded by a cluster of blackjack oaks, Isaac collapsed, his chest heaving. Noya lay beside him, her breathing a series of ragged, wet clicks, her hand still white-knuckled around the leather satchel. Out here, kindness was never a moment of safety. It was a heavy, dangerous burden. Isaac looked back at the creek, then up at the ridge where the silhouettes were already beginning to move. He had cut the rope, just as Ezekiel had done once, and now the piece of the ghost was gone. The lone drifter had done the impossible, and the price was only beginning to be tallied.
Isaac carried Noya through the jagged teeth of the Wichita Mountains, her weight a silent accusation against his years of indifference. The rain had turned into a steady, rhythmic drumming against the granite, masking the sound of his boots. He found a shallow overhang, a sanctuary of stone and gnarled blackjack oak roots that offered a sliver of dryness. He laid her down on a bed of dead leaves, his own breath coming in ragged white plumes. The silence that followed was heavy, more suffocating than the storm. Isaac didn't speak. Out here, words were a currency he spent sparingly. He moved with the efficient, joyless precision of a man used to surviving on his own.
He built a small, smokeless fire deep in the belly of the cave, the flickering orange light dancing across Noya's sun-darkened face. Her eyes were open now, tracking his every move with the cold intensity of a trapped hawk. As he reached for his knife to cut away the sodden fabric of her leggings, she flinched. It was the sharp, reflexive jerk of a creature more familiar with the sting of a lash than the steady hand of a stranger. "I'm just checking the damage," Isaac said, his voice low and gravelly, unused to the vibration of speech. He cleaned the deep purple contusions where the stallion's weight had nearly crushed the life from her. She didn't cry out, her jaw set in a line so hard it looked carved from the surrounding rock. But even in her fevered state, her hand never strayed far from the leather satchel. She clutched it to her chest as if it were her own beating heart, her knuckles white and trembling. Isaac sat back against the cave wall, the heat of the fire barely reaching the marrow of his bones. He watched the rain veil the entrance, knowing that Jedediah Boone was out there, circling like a wolf in the dark. For 10 years, Isaac had perfected the habit of staying out of trouble. He had been a ghost, a man who saw everything and touched nothing. But the weight of the satchel and the fire in Noya's eyes told him that the ghost was dead. By saving her, he had pulled a thread that was about to unravel the entire territory. He didn't ask for her story. He didn't ask what was in the bag. He simply sharpened his blade, the rasp of steel on stone, a lonely promise that he wouldn't turn away. If you believe that a single act of kindness is worth more than 1,000 laws, stay with us for the next chapter of Isaac's redemption. Subscribe now to ensure you never miss a moment of this journey through the heart of the Old West.
The storm had settled into a low, mournful whistle through the crevices of the granite cave. Isaac sat near the mouth, watching the shadows of the blackjack oaks dance in the dying firelight. Behind him, Noya stirred. The fever had broken, leaving her pale but conscious, her eyes 2 dark embers in the gloom. She was no longer clutching the satchel to her chest. She was holding it out, her fingers trembling slightly against the worn leather. "Look," she said. The word was a dry rasp, but it held a command. Isaac didn't move at first. He had spent a decade looking away from things that didn't belong to him. But the silence of the Wichita Mountains was different tonight. It felt like the world was holding its breath. He crawled closer and took the satchel. Inside were bundles of paper, thick with official seals and signatures. He didn't need to be a lawyer to understand what he was seeing. These were affidavits, statements from families along the Cimarron River, detailing how Clancy Root had used threats and forged deeds to swallow thousands of acres of Cherokee land. "These are dead men's deeds," Isaac murmured, his voice sounding hollow in the cave. "They will be if they don't reach Guthrie," Noya replied. Her voice gained a hard edge, the kind of strength that comes from having nothing left to lose. Root isn't just taking land, he's taking a legacy. He thinks he can bury the truth in the red mud of Medicine Creek. Isaac looked at the papers, then back at the woman who nearly drowned to protect them. He thought about the men on the ridge, Jedediah Boone and his pack of killers. They weren't just hunting a woman, they were hunting a secret that could hang Clancy Root and half the crooked deputies in the territory. The habit of staying out of trouble felt like a heavy, ill-fitting coat Isaac was finally ready to shed. For years he had been a ghost, invisible to the law and the lawless alike. But as he looked at Noya, he realized that you can't be a ghost once you've tasted the cold reality of someone else's survival. "If we move toward Guthrie, we're riding into a noose," Isaac said. "I'm not asking you to ride for me,
Noya said, her eyes locking onto his with a weight that felt like iron. "I'm telling you that the land doesn't forget." Isaac nodded slowly. He didn't offer a promise. He didn't offer a prayer. He simply tucked the satchel into his own duster and checked the cylinder of his revolver. He knew with a cold certainty that from this moment on, every mile they traveled would be borrowed time. The lone drifter was gone, and in his place was a man who understood exactly what kindness was about to cost him.
The sun rose as a pale, sickly disk over the Wichita Mountains, casting long, skeletal shadows across the granite boulders. Isaac and Noya didn't take the main trails. They moved through the high country, where the blackjack oaks grew thick and the ground was a treacherous puzzle of loose shale. Isaac led the roan by the bridle, his eyes scanning the horizon for any break in the tree line that didn't look natural. He felt them before he saw them. It was a prickle at the base of his neck, the same sensation he'd felt years ago before a botched stagecoach job in the Panhandle. "Stay low," he whispered, pressing Noya back against a moss-slicked rock. A mile below them, 3 riders moved with the slow, methodical pace of hounds on a scent. Jedediah Boone was in the lead, his white hat a stark contrast against the red dirt. They weren't hiding. They were tracking the blood and the mud Isaac had left behind when he pulled Noya from the creek. "They're closing the gap," she said, her voice stronger now, though her face was still tight with pain. "Boone won't stop. He doesn't just want the papers. He wants to make sure no one ever hears the name Noya again." Isaac looked at the jagged ridge ahead. If they kept climbing, they'd be trapped against the cliffs. If they went down, they'd walk straight into Boone's rifles. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a spare wool blanket and a length of hemp rope. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Performing a ghost's trick," Isaac replied. He began tying the blanket to a fallen branch, propping it up among the boulders to mimic the silhouette of a resting traveler. He then led his horse toward a narrow, hidden ravine that cut deep into the mountainside. A sharp crack echoed through the canyon. A rifle bullet pulverized a nearby stone, sending a spray of granite shards into the air. Boone was testing the range. Isaac didn't fire back. He took Noya's hand, his grip steady and warm against her cold skin. They slipped into the shadows of the ravine just as the riders began their final ascent. It was a desperate game of hide and seek, played with life and death. Isaac knew that every minute they bought was a minute closer to the law in Guthrie, but out here, the only law that mattered was the one written in lead.
The heat arrived before the smoke. As Isaac and Noya emerged from the ravine onto the edge of the salt plains, the horizon wasn't red with dirt, but with a flickering, hungry orange. To the north, Clancy Root's men had done the unthinkable. They had dropped phosphorus matches into the tinder, dry prairie grass. A wall of fire, half a mile wide and growing, was racing toward them, driven by a sudden, hot wind that tasted of ash and death. "They're burning us out," Noya whispered, her hand tightening on the leather satchel. "They'd rather scorch the earth than let this truth reach the city." Isaac looked back. Boone's riders were visible now, sitting their horses on the high ground, watching the inferno do their work. To the left was a sheer drop into a salt-crusted basin. To the right, the fire was already leaping into the blackjack oaks. The only way forward was a narrow break in the flame, a shifting corridor of smoke where the grass was thin and the wind swirled in a violent eddy. "We can't make it through that," Noya said, the heat already blistering the air in her lungs. "The horse, he'll bolt." Isaac didn't answer. He took off his duster and soaked it with the last of their canteen water. He stepped to the front of his roan, a horse that was already rolling its eyes and baring its teeth in terror. With a steady hand, Isaac tied the wet cloth over the animal's eyes.
He leaned in close, whispering into the horse's ear, his voice a low, rhythmic vibration that seemed to defy the roar of the oncoming fire. "I'm going to carry you," Isaac told Noya. He lifted her, ignoring the scream of his own healing ribs, and settled her behind the saddle. He took the bridle in his hand. Then Isaac Clarkson did the impossible. He walked into the fire. The heat was a physical blow, a weight that tried to buckle his knees. His lungs felt like they were filled with molten lead. Sparks rained down, stinging his neck, but he didn't run. He walked with a slow, agonizing, deliberate pace, feeling for the cool spots in the dirt, guiding the blind horse through the suffocating gray veil. For a moment, they were swallowed by the orange light, a ghost and a girl lost in the sun. When they finally stumbled out onto the blackened, smoking earth on the other side, Isaac collapsed to one knee, his clothes smoldering, his vision blurred by soot. They were alive. In a world that burns everything in its path, will you be the one who stands for the truth? Subscribe now to join Isaac and Noya on their final stretch toward justice. The blackened earth of the salt plains crunched under Isaac's boots, a sound like ground bone. The air was still thick with the acrid stench of burnt sage and scorched wool. Isaac's face was a mask of soot and sweat, his eyes bloodshot from the smoke. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. Behind him, Noya sat slumped on the roan, her strength flagging as the adrenaline of the fire faded. They were two ghosts moving through a landscape that looked like the end of the world. As the sun began to dip, painting the Oklahoma sky in hues of bruised orange and deep violet, they reached the banks of the Cimarron River. The water here was wide and shallow, silvered by the evening light. Isaac stopped to let the horse drink, his own hands shaking as he splashed the cool water over his scorched skin. "Why didn't you let the fire take us?" Noya asked suddenly. Her voice was thin, but the defiance was returning. "You could have turned back. You could have been 5 miles away before the first spark hit the grass." Isaac looked at her, his reflection shimmering in the river's surface. He thought about the original script he'd followed for years, the one where the drifter stays a shadow. A man spends enough time running, he starts to forget what he's running toward, he said quietly. Maybe I just got tired of being a ghost. They spent the night in a hollow beneath a cut bank, the shared labor of survival acting as a bridge between them. Isaac tended to her scorched legs with a poultice of river mud and crushed herbs, his movements slow and deliberate, mirroring the quiet care Ezekiel had once shown. In the silence of the Oklahoma night, Isaac felt the weight of his own history, the mistakes, the cowardice, the long years of looking away. Noya watched him, her hand resting on the satchel. "In my village, they say a person isn't defined by the shadow they cast, but by the light they stand in when the sun is highest." Isaac didn't reply, but as he sharpened his knife for the long trek into Guthrie, he felt a strange, quiet victory. He wasn't a hero, and he wasn't a saint. He was just a man who had finally decided to stand upright. The road to redemption was paved with red dirt and blood, but for the first time in a decade, Isaac Clarkson knew exactly where he was going.
The skyline of Guthrie appeared not as a refuge, but as a trap. The morning sun hit the red brick buildings of the land office, casting long, sharp shadows across the dusty thoroughfare. Isaac and Noya rode in on a single exhausted horse, their clothes tattered and their skins stained with the soot of the salt plains. They looked like apparitions risen from the earth, and the townspeople stopped in their tracks to watch them pass. In the center of the red dirt square, the path was blocked.
Clancy Root stood there, looking every bit the refined gentleman in a charcoal suit and a silk cravat, but his eyes were as cold as a winter creek. Beside him stood Jedediah Boone and a dozen men wearing deputy stars that looked too shiny to be earned. "Mr. Clarkson," Root called out, his voice smooth and carrying across the square. "I'd heard a drifter had abducted a woman from the territory. I see you've brought her back to face her crimes." Isaac didn't reach for his gun. He stayed in the saddle, his hand resting casually near the duster pocket where the satchel lay. He felt the weight of the town's gaze, shopkeepers, laborers, and families who had heard the rumors of Root's land acquisitions. "She's not here for a trial, Root," Isaac said, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "She's here to deliver a message." Boone stepped forward, his hand hovering over the grip of the peacemaker. "Step down, drifter. Hand over the girl and whatever stolen property you're carrying, or we'll bury you right here in the street." The tension was a physical pressure, a cord stretched to the point of snapping. Isaac looked at Noya. Despite her injuries, she pulled herself upright, her chin lifted in a gesture of pure Cherokee pride. She didn't look at the guns, she looked at the people of Guthrie. "I am Noya, granddaughter of the High Water clan," she cried out, her voice ringing with a strength that seemed impossible for her frail frame. "In this bag is the truth of your stolen homes and my people's blood. Will you let them kill the truth in broad daylight?" A ripple went through the crowd. The lone drifter saw the shift, the moment where the townspeople began to look at Root not with fear, but with a growing restless anger. Isaac stepped off his horse, standing between Noya and the line of deputies. He wasn't a ghost anymore. He was a wall.
The standoff in Guthrie didn't end with a thunder of hooves or a grand speech. It ended with the slow, crushing weight of the truth. As Noya held the satchel high, the silence in the red dirt square became a physical thing, suffocating and hot. Jedediah Boone's hand twitched over his holster, his eyes darting to Clancy Root, looking for the signal to paint the street red. But the signal never came. Root looked at the faces of the townspeople, men like Silas Thorne and Miller Vance, and he saw the shift. He saw the moment his power, built on fear and forged paper, evaporated like mist in the Oklahoma sun. Isaac Clarkson stood his ground, his feet planted in the red dust. He wasn't reaching for his gun, because he didn't have to. The impossible feat wasn't the rescue at the creek or the walk through the fire. It was the fact that a man who had been a ghost for 10 years was now the anchor for an entire community's conscience. "The law's comin', Root," Isaac said, his voice quiet but carrying to the furthest edges of the square. "And for the first time in a long time, it's not comin' for the poor or the broken. It's comin' for you." One by one, the townspeople stepped forward, forming a human wall between the deputies and the drifter. The shiny stars on Boone's men suddenly seemed very small. Root, realizing the game was over, turned and walked back into his office, the heavy oak doors closing like the sound of a gavel. The law, the real law, would find him there by sunset. As the sun dipped below the horizon, bathing Guthrie in a final golden light, Isaac helped Noya back onto the roan. They didn't stay for the praise or the rewards. Isaac took the bridle and began to walk toward the open trail, heading back toward the Wichita Mountains. He wasn't running this time. He was just moving forward. True kindness, Isaac realized, wasn't about changing the whole world. It was about the quiet victory of refusing to look away when the world told you to turn your back. It was about the chance to finally stand upright. As the silhouettes of the man and the woman faded into the purple dusk, the Oklahoma wind whispered through the blackjack oaks, a soft reminder that even a drifter can find his way home. In a world that tells you to look away,
be the one who stands tall. If Isaac's journey touched your heart, subscribe now and join us for more stories of courage and redemption in the Old West.
If you enjoyed this latest story on life in the Old Wild West, then I'm sure you will love the next one coming up. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you can get updates on time. Did I tell you we post new, exciting, heartwarming stories daily? Subscribe now to join us so you won't miss any new stories.